What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there, were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
Chapter 1. The Transformation. I never thought it would happen to me. You hear about the outbreaks in the news, see the chaos in the streets, but you always think, it won't be me. Until it is. It started with a fever. Nothing unusual, I told myself. Probably just a flu. But deep down, I knew. The way my skin crawled, the strange aches in my bones. This was different. I locked myself in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, skin pale and clammy. As I watched, dark veins began to creep across my face like spiderwebs. "No," I whispered, but my voice sounded foreign, guttural. I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911. The operator's voice seemed to come from far away. "Please," I managed to croak. "I think I'm infected." But even as I spoke, I felt my consciousness slipping. My vision blurred. The world tilted on its axis. I collapsed to the cold tile floor, my body racked with violent spasms. And then suddenly, stillness. I lay there, expecting darkness, expecting an end. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt different. My body was heavy, unresponsive, but my mind was achingly clear. I tried to move, to stand, but my limbs wouldn't obey. Panic rose in my throat. Or it would have, if I still had control over such things. Slowly, jerkily, my body began to move on its own accord. I watched helplessly as my hand reached the doorknob, twisting it open. In the mirror, I caught a final glimpse of myself, but the eyes that stared back were no longer my own. They were milky white, devoid of humanity. I wanted to scream, to cry, to rage against what I'd become. But all that escaped my lips was a low, inhuman growl. I was no longer in control, and as my body shambled into the bathroom, driven by a hunger I couldn't comprehend, I realized with horrifying clarity. I was a passenger in my own body, a witness to the monster I'd become. The transformation was complete. My new life as a zombie had begun. Chapter 2. New Life as a Zombie. The world looked different through these new eyes. Colors seemed muted, yet certain movements caught my attention with startling clarity. My hearing was sharper too, picking up sounds from blocks away. Heartbeats, breathing, the rush of blood through veins. My body moved with a singular purpose, driven by an insatiable hunger I couldn't control. I tried to stop, to turn back, but it was like screaming inside a soundproof room. No one could hear me, least of all this shell that used to be mine. As I stumbled down the street, I noticed others like me. Their vacant eyes and shuffling gaits mirrored my own. I wondered if they were trapped inside, aware but helpless. The first time I encountered a living human, the contrast was jarring. He was so vibrant, so alive. I wanted to warn him, to tell him to run. Instead, my body lurched forward, arms outstretched. The man's eyes widened in terror. He turned to flee, but my new form was faster than it looked. My hands grasped his shirt, yanked him close. I felt his warm breath on my face, saw the pulse jumping in his neck. "No!" I screamed internally. "Stop! Please!" But my pleas fell on deaf ears. My own. I watched in horror as my teeth sank into his flesh, tasting blood for the first time. The hunger that drove me momentarily subsided, replaced by a sickening satisfaction. As the man's lifeless body fell to the ground, I felt a piece of my humanity slip away. I had just killed someone. Worse, I had eaten them. The revulsion I felt was at odds with the contentment humming through my reanimated flesh. Days blended together as I roamed the streets, a prisoner of my own body. I tried to cling to memories of what I was, desperate not to lose myself completely. But with each passing hour, each new victim, I could feel my grip on my former self weakening. Was this my existence now? A mindless, shambling corpse, spreading death and infection? Or was there still hope for salvation? As night fell, and I joined a growing horde of the undead, one thought echoed in the recesses of my mind. I have to find a way to gain control, or die trying. Chapter 3. Encounters with Humans. As days stretched into weeks, my existence became a nightmare of helpless observation. My body, now a decaying shell, continued its relentless pursuit of the living, but my mind remained frustratingly alert, forced to witness every horrific act. I saw fear etched on countless faces, men, women, children. Their screams haunted me, but nothing prepared me for the day I encountered someone I knew. It was Sarah, my best friend since college. She was helping to evacuate a group of survivors. When she saw me, her eyes widened in recognition. "Oh God, is that you?" she whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. I wanted to cry out, to warn her to stay back. Instead, my body lurched toward hers, arms outstretched. I saw the moment hope drained from her eyes, replaced by horror and grief. "I'm sorry," Sarah choked out, raising a gun with trembling hands. The gunshot rang out, and I felt a sharp impact on my shoulder, but there was no pain, only a dull awareness of damage. My body kept moving forward, unperturbed. Sarah's face crumpled. She turned and ran, shouting for the others to move. I shambled after her, my mind screaming in anguish while my body pursued its prey. That night, as I roamed the empty streets, I grappled with a new kind of torment. I had become a threat to everyone I ever cared about. How many more loved ones would I be forced to terrorize? But amidst the despair, a spark of determination ignited. There had to be a way to fight this, to regain control. I began to focus all my mental energy on my right hand, trying to make it twitch, to move even a fraction of an inch. For days, I concentrated on nothing else. And then finally, a miracle. My pinky finger moved, just slightly, but it moved under my control. It wasn't much, but it was hope. A small victory in the battle for my body and soul. As I continued to wander with the Horde, I clung to that hope, that tiny spark of defiance against the virus that controlled me. I didn't know if I could ever fully regain myself, or if there was a cure out there somewhere. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never stop fighting. For Sarah, for all the others I'd hurt, and the human I used to be. I would find a way to make this right. Chapter 4. The Horde. As my solitary wanderings came to an end, I found myself inexorably drawn to others of my kind. A hive mentality seemed to take over, pulling us together into a massive, shuffling horde. It was both terrifying and oddly comforting to be part of this grotesque collection. The horde moved with a singular purpose, driven by one shared hunger. I observed the behavior of my fellow zombies, noting the eerie synchronicity of our movements. Some retained scraps of clothing or accessories from their former lives. A business suit here, a child's backpack there. Did they retain their consciousness like I did? Were they also screaming silently inside their decaying shells? I had no way of knowing, and the thought of being alone in my awareness was almost too much to bear. As we shambled through the ruins of what was once a thriving city, I noticed patterns emerging. The horde seemed to respond to stimuli as one entity. A distant sound would turn all the heads simultaneously. A fleeing animal would draw our collective attention. It was as if we were connected by some unseen, sinister network. Yet even as my body moved in concert with the others, my mind rebelled against the collective mindset. I clung fiercely to my individuality, to the memories and thoughts that made me who I was. It was an exhausting mental battle, resisting the pull of the Horde's unified consciousness. One day, we encountered a military blockade. Soldiers opened fire, their bullets tearing through rotting flesh. I watched as zombies fell around me, their bodies finally going still. A part of me envied them for their release. But the Horde pressed on, undeterred. Those of us still mobile clambered over our fallen brethren, driven by our insatiable hunger. I felt my body crawling forward, even as my mind recoiled at the horror of it all. As we breached the barricade, I saw the terror in the soldiers' eyes. They fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed by our sheer numbers. In the chaos, I spotted a young soldier, barely out of his teens. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. Not of who I was, but of the humanity still trapped inside me. In that instant, I summoned every ounce of will I had, focusing all the small control I'd gained over my pinky finger. I managed to twitch my hand. It wasn't much, but the soldier noticed, his eyes widened surprised. Before I could see what he would do, the Horde surged forward, and I lost sight of him in the melee. But that brief connection gave me renewed hope. Someone had seen me, the real me, through this monstrous exterior. As the Horde moved forward, leaving carnage in its wake, I made a promise to myself to keep fighting, to keep trying to regain control, and somehow I would find a way to communicate with the living, to let them know that I was still here, trapped inside this walking corpse. The battle for my humanity was far from over. Chapter 5: Survival of Human Consciousness. As weeks turned into months, I found myself in a constant struggle to maintain my sense of self. The primal urges of my zombie body threatened to overwhelm me at every turn. But I clung desperately to the memories and emotions that defined my humanity. I began to create mental exercises to keep my mind sharp. I'd recite poetry I'd memorized in school, solve complex math problems, and vividly recall cherished memories. Anything to stay connected to who I once was. But with each passing day, it became harder. The relentless hunger, the violent acts my body committed, they took their toll. I found myself grappling with intense moral dilemmas. Was I responsible for the death that I caused, even though I couldn't control my actions? The guilt was overwhelming at times. One particularly harrowing day, my body cornered a young mother and her child. As I watched helplessly, unable to stop myself, a fragment of a long-forgotten conversation floated through my mind. My own mother's voice. It's our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. In that moment, something shifted. I focused all my willpower, all my remaining humanity, into one desperate act, and for a brief, miraculous second, I regained control. My body stumbled, giving the woman just enough time to escape with her child. The effort left me mentally exhausted, but it was a turning point. I had made a choice, exerted my will over the zombie instincts. It wasn't much, but it was proof that my humanity wasn't entirely lost. From that day on, I approached my condition with renewed determination. I began to look for patterns, moments when the zombie impulses were weak. I practiced exerting control in small ways, twitching a finger, turning my head slightly. Each tiny victory fueled my resolve. But even as I fought to retain my human consciousness, I couldn't help but ponder the larger questions. What was the purpose of this tormented existence? Was there any meaning to be found in this half-life? Or was I simply prolonging my suffering? I thought of the people I'd loved, the dreams I'd had. In quiet moments, when the Horde was still, I imagined the life I would have lived. Yet, even when in my darkest hours, a spark of hope remained. There had to be a reason I was still aware, still fighting. Perhaps understanding the reason was my new purpose. As we shuffled through the ruins of civilization, I made a silent promise to myself. I would find a way to make this existence mean something, whether through small acts of defiance against my zombie nature, or by somehow helping the surviving humans. I would not let this be the end of my story. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges I couldn't even imagine. But I was determined to face them, to keep fighting for every scrap of humanity I could retain. In a world overrun by the dead, my consciousness had survived. And as long as it did, hope survived with it. Chapter 6. The Cure? As our horde meandered through the desolate landscape, whispers began to circulate among the surviving humans we encountered. At first, I paid little attention, focused as I was on my internal struggle. But gradually, a word began to stand out, repeated with increased frequency and urgency. Cure. The concept seemed almost laughable. A cure? For this walking death that had consumed the world? And yet, the more I heard, the more a dangerous emotion began to grow within me. Hope. Apparently, a group of scientists had barricaded themselves in a remote research facility when the outbreak began. They'd been working tirelessly, using data from infected individuals to develop a potential treatment. Rumors spoke of limited success. Test subjects regaining motor control, showing signs of higher brain function. The news spread like wildfire among the living, but it also seemed to have an effect on the infected. Our horde's movements became more erratic, as if guided by some collective subconscious awareness. Were the others, like me, drawn to the possibility of salvation? I found my thoughts constantly returning to the idea of a cure. What would it mean to regain control of my body? To speak, to touch, to feel again? The yearning was almost painful in its intensity. But with hope came fear. What if the cure didn't work on me? What if I was too far gone? And even if it did work, how could I ever atone for the atrocities my body had committed? As we drew closer to the rumored location of the research facility, I noticed increased military presence. Heavily armed soldiers patrolled the areas, their face grim and determined. They were clearly protecting something important. One day, during a brief moment of clarity, I managed to focus my gaze on a military map left behind during a hasty evacuation. There, marked in red, was the location of the facility. It was so close, tantalizingly so. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I tried to steer my shuffling body in that direction. It was like trying to move a mountain with my mind. But slowly, painstakingly, I began to make progress. Days passed as I inched closer to my goal. The journey was fraught with danger. Military patrols to avoid, other zombies to navigate around, and my own body's relentless hunger to contend with. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I saw it. A sprawling complex surrounded by high walls and armed guards. The research facility. My possible salvation. As I stood there, gazing at what could be my last hope for redemption, a new wave of determination washed over me. I didn't know what awaited me inside those walls. A cure, a swift end, or something in between. But I knew I had to try. With renewed focus, I began the arduous task of approaching the facility. Every step was a battle, every inch gained a victory against the virus that controlled me. The cure was within reach, but the true test of my remaining humanity was yet to come. Chapter 7. Climax. The research facility loomed before me. As I approached, alarms blared and soldiers rushed to their positions. I could see the fear and determination in their eyes as they raised their weapons. In that moment, I faced the ultimate test of my willpower. Every instinct of my zombie body screamed to attack, to feed. The hunger was overwhelming, threatening to drown out my last shreds of humanity. But I couldn't let it win. Not now. Not when I was so close. With monumental effort, I managed to slow my approach. My movements became jerky, uncoordinated, as I fought against my own body. I focused all my energy on my face, trying desperately to convey the awareness trapped inside. A young soldier stepped forward, her rifle trained on me, but there was no hesitation in her eyes. She tilted her head, studying me intently. Did she see something different in me compared to the other zombies? Wait, she called out to her comrades. "This one's different." Her words sent a surge of hope through me. I redoubled my efforts, fighting for control of every muscle. Slowly, agonizingly, I managed to raise my hand, not in an attack, but in a plea. The soldier's eyes widened. She lowered her weapon slightly and took a cautious step forward. "Can you understand me?" she asked. I summoned every ounce of strength I had left. My jaw worked soundlessly, long dormant vocal cords struggling to function. And then, in a voice that was barely more than a rasp, I forced out a single word. "Help." The courtyard erupted in chaos. Soldiers shouted at each other. Scientists were summoned, and I found myself quickly surrounded. Instead, I was carefully restrained and rushed inside the facility. What followed was a blur of tests, injections, and anxious waiting. I drifted in and out of awareness, the hunger mercifully dulled by whatever they had given me. Through it all, I clung to that last spark of hope, that possibility of reclaiming my humanity. And then, gradually, I began to feel again. First pain, a welcome sensation after months of numbness. Then other sensations followed. The coolness of my sheets against my skin, the taste of water on my tongue. When I finally opened my own eyes, under my control, I saw a room full of astonished faces. The young soldier who had first recognized my humanity stood among them, a smile of disbelief on her face. "Welcome back," she said softly. As the realization hit me that I had just regained control, that I was myself again, I was overwhelmed with emotion, joy, relief, and deep, aching sorrow for all that I had been lost. I began to weep, the ability to express my feelings both foreign and profoundly comforting. But even as I celebrated this miraculous recovery, I knew that my journey was far from over. There were millions more like me out there, trapped in their own bodies, and I had been given a second chance, an opportunity to make amends for the harm I was unwillingly caused. As the scientists eagerly began to ask me questions, to learn from my unique experience, I decided that I would dedicate myself to finding a cure for others, to being a bridge between the infected and the living. My ordeal had given me a perspective no one else had, and I intended to use it. The road ahead was long and difficult. The world had changed irrevocably. My place in it was uncertain. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I faced the future not with despair, but with determination and hope. "My name is John." I spoke it out aloud, reclaiming my identity. And with that simple act, my new life began.